Hi YouTube, my name is Jack, and today we're going to talk about questions that it is inappropriate for someone outside of the Gardnerian tradition, or really outside of any initiatory tradition of Wicca, to ask initiates. This video is prompted because I was having a conversation with one of my seekers yesterday, who asked me just offhandedly, "Oh, was so and so an initiate?" And we talked a little bit through the etiquette of that, and I said, you are not responsible for following rules that you haven't been taught yet, but generally speaking, it is inappropriate to ask if someone is an initiate unless you are trying to confirm a claim that they themselves have made about initiatory status. And that sort of got me thinking in general about the kinds of questions that it is and is not appropriate to ask from the outside of something like Gardnerian Wicca. Gardnerian Wicca, as probably anyone who follows this channel knows, is bound by an oath of secrecy. So there are certain things that initiates agree not to discuss with non-initiates. And that can make it challenging for people who are outside of the tradition but who want to learn more about it and who want to potentially become a part of it. Because there is this opacity, because there is an informational asymmetry. And it's not just a matter of there are certain things that initiates can't or won't talk about. It's also a matter of people on the outside of the tradition don't know what those things are. And so they don't know which things it's okay for them to ask about, which things they shouldn't be asking about. Every now and then someone in a seekers group online asks a question that is not an appropriate question to ask, but they really had no way of knowing that. And then people end up getting upset with them even though they didn't know any better. And it just, it can be a lot. It can be a lot to deal with. So let's talk a little bit about the sorts of things that it is and isn't okay to ask an initiate. The first thing that I want to say here is keep in mind that these boundaries are somewhat flexible and they're context dependent. If I have someone who is a member of my seekers group, who I've known for a very long time, who is getting ready for initiation, like we've had conversations about initiation, it's scheduled, it's on the table, there are questions that I'm going to be much more willing to answer with someone like that than with someone on the internet that I've never met. Right? If you are a seeker and you're training with a group, your group leaders will have boundaries of their own around what they consider acceptable and not acceptable, and that's a conversation for you to have with them. Because it may be the case that there are some things that people are willing to discuss in the context of a training group or one-on-one with someone that they know well and whom they're planning to initiate, that they wouldn't discuss in a broader public context. And I think that's important to understand, right? A lot of the time when people ask a question and then get a negative response, they're asking it in a public forum or in like an online group or something like that, which is just not a place that any of us are going to want to talk about details or specifics or anything that's intimate or close to home. So with that in mind, the oath of secrecy that Gardnerians take is in many ways subject to interpretation. So each person has their own boundaries around their oath. There are things that I might be willing to talk about that some other initiates might not be willing to talk about. There are a lot of things that other initiates are willing to talk about that I would not. And that's a personal decision. That's a personal line that people get to draw for themselves. Broadly speaking, I think there are three things that most of us agree are covered by our oath of secrecy. And those are the identities of other initiates, the names of the gods that we worship, right? Like I'm not gonna tell you the names of the gods that I invoke in my coven, and also the specifics of what happens in any initiatory ritual. So let's talk through those three things, because I think really and truly, those are the three things that it is inappropriate for a seeker to ask, in my opinion, right? And again, you shouldn't be held accountable for rules that you don't know about. If you don't know any better and you ask a question, like totally fine. The appropriate response for someone to give is to gently inform you that, hey, there's a boundary here. This really isn't something that we can discuss. If someone gently informs you of that, if someone gently corrects you and says, hey, I really can't talk about X, Y, and Z, and then you keep pushing, that's the point where you're an asshole. But let's talk about it. So, starting with the identities of other initiates. This one is complicated because, of course, we have a vouching system in Gardnerian Wicca. If someone is claiming to be a Gardnerian, you can and should go to other initiates, go to known initiates, including things like the Seekers groups online, and say, hey, person X is claiming to be a Gardnerian coven leader. I'm thinking about joining their group. Can you confirm for me that they're legit? And that is 100% above board. That is a thing that you can and should do. What it's not appropriate to do is to try to satisfy idle curiosity by asking about someone's initiatory status if they haven't volunteered it. There are lots of people who are initiates who aren't public about being initiates for lots of very good reasons, right? Historically, people have lost their jobs if it came out that they were pagan. People have had bricks thrown through their windows. People have, in some cases, had their children taken away from them by courts. Like, there are lots of reasons that someone may not want to be public about being a witch. We respect that. And if someone isn't volunteering that information themselves, it's nobody's business. Truthfully, it's nobody's business outside of their coven, even amongst other initiates. If someone says, I am a Gardnerian, yes, you absolutely can and should verify that claim by talking to known members of the community who are willing to provide that vouch for you. If someone has not volunteered that information themselves, you don't get to know. And it is inappropriate to ask because they might be an initiate just protecting their privacy, or they might not be an initiate, but either way, that's not the business of anyone who isn't in direct contact with them in a situation where they are claiming to be Gardnerian initiates. So I think that's the first just really big one that I wanted to get out in the open there is the identities of initiates, right? If you come into a seekers group and you start speculating and you go, oh, hey, is so and so an initiate? I noticed that whatever, like, I can think of examples, but I don't really want to share any of the examples. If you just come into a group and you're like, hey, this person has never claimed to be an initiate, but I think they might be, are they? That's something that's going to get shut down. Names of the gods, I don't feel like I need to spend a lot of time on that one. That should be pretty self-explanatory. There's a boundary there. We're not going to talk about that. And it's a red flag to me if someone, knowing that there's a boundary there, if someone continues to ask and continues to press. If someone comes in and is like, oh, well, is the name of the goddess Catherine? Is the name of the goddess Johanna? Like, once you've been told, hey, this is something that initiates aren't going to discuss with you because it's private, if you keep asking the question, what it signals is that you don't respect our oaths of secrecy. And if you don't respect our oaths of secrecy, I sure as shit wouldn't trust you to be initiated and to respect your own oath of secrecy. So if I'm talking to a seeker, once that seeker has been informed about the boundaries around, like, I can't talk about the sort of thing you're asking, if that person keeps asking those questions, that's a big red flag to me, because it tells me that they're not willing to respect the boundary that's been drawn. The third thing, again, that like is generally covered, generally agreed to be part of what initiates won't talk about, is the specifics of what happens in any initiatory ritual. So again, it like you're not responsible for respecting the boundary until you know about the boundary, but once you've watched this video, you know about the boundary. If you come in to a conversation and you're like, hey, is this thing a part of Gardnerian ritual? Like, do Gardnerians do X in ritual? I heard that Gardnerians flap their arms like wings and quack like ducks as part of the ritual opening. Is that a thing that Gardnerians do? We're not going to talk about that. And we're not going to say yes, we're not going to say no. And it doesn't matter whether it is or not, right? Where you're going to get the same response for something that isn't a part of Gardnerian ritual as for something that is a part of Gardnerian ritual. But asking the question, do you do this in an initiatory context? When you know that initiatory ritual is for initiates and not for outsiders, um, the thing that it ends up communicating is a lack of respect. And I think that a lot of seekers, like initially, right, like before they get acclimatized, before people hopefully kindly talk to them about the etiquette, I think that a lot of initiates have the impression that they're doing a good thing by asking that kind of question. I think a lot of seekers have the idea that, like, oh, I'm going to show that I'm interested and that I care and that I've done my research and I've put in the hours because I've gone and read everything I can about everything that claims to be a Gardnerian ritual, and I have all these questions. And I think that a lot of people come to it from that place of, like, thinking that I'm being proactive and that I'm going to show genuine interest. But you gotta remember that there's a sense of privacy, there's a sense of intimacy here. It's not even that, like, oh, we must protect the secrets. And that's part of it, but a lot of it is also just that, like, initiatory ritual is intimate, it's personal, it's something that's for us. And when you're a seeker, you're not a part of that group yet, right? It's like trying to add yourself to whatever the family group chat when you're not yet, a member of the family. Um, so it is inappropriate to ask a question that you know you won't get an answer to. And questions like that include, hey, do you flap your arms and quack like ducks as part of Gardnerian ritual, or any variant thereupon? And again, no one is responsible for respecting that boundary until they know about that boundary. Generally speaking, if you're approaching Gardnerian Wicca specifically, most seekers are aware that there's an oath of secrecy involved, so that's generally a boundary that people at least have a rough sense of. Now, again, I do want to say the boundaries may be different in a public online forum versus like one-on-one with your group leaders or in your seekers group. A thing that I say to people in my seekers group is you can always ask the question, and sometimes the answer is going to be, I can't tell you that. I don't want my seekers to feel like they're not allowed to be curious or they're not allowed to have questions. I know what the boundaries are more than they do because I'm the one who has taken the oath. And so it's my responsibility to know where those lines are and to enforce them when necessary. But I don't want my seekers to feel like they're never allowed to ask any questions because there might be an oath of secrecy involved. But that's because they're in my group. That's because we know each other. We've begun to build a bond of trust with each other. And I am in a role where I am training and teaching them. That's a very different relationship than with a stranger on the internet, right? I will be more permissive with people who are in my seekers group than I will be with a stranger on the internet who's asking me if I flap my arms and quack like a duck. So I just, I think it can be very difficult for people on the outside of the tradition to understand what the boundaries are and where they are and why they are what they are. I think a lot of this comes back, again, not to a sense of like, we must protect the mysteries, although that's part of it. But I think there's also just a bigger sense that things are private, right? Sometimes you get people who will phrase a question and they'll say, like, I don't know if this is secret, but ba 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 ba. And sometimes the answer is, it's not necessarily secret, but it's private, it's intimate, right? If someone asks me, like, I don't know if this is secret, but what's your lineage? It's not exactly that it's secret, but my lineage is a very intimate and personal thing. That's not something I'm going to share with a stranger. Um, if I'm vouching, I will share some relevant details about my upline so that those details can be confirmed. But just like giving away a list of names, I wouldn't be comfortable with that. And it's not necessarily because it's like one of the secrets of the Gardnerian tradition. It's just that this thing that we do, it's so intimate, it's so personal. And part of what the Oath of Secrecy is for is that it protects that sense of intimacy. And having access to that intimacy is something that's earned over time, mostly by initiation. But then again, there's kind of the build up to initiation. There's spending time with a group, there's getting to know people, there's building relationships. And that's why I'm going to be more understanding of certain questions coming from someone who knows me and who's in my group than coming from someone on the internet that I've never met in person. So, um, yeah, so okay, taking a step back. Again, big picture. I think it's great to have curiosity. I think it's great to have questions. Um, there are other boundaries that might exist depending on the person or people that you're talking to, because again, different people have different levels of sensitivity around their oaths. But I think a good starting place for questions not to ask a Gardnerian initiate is the identity of any initiate or the initiatory status of any person who has not openly claimed to be an initiate, the names of the gods, and then the specifics of what happens in any initiatory ritual. If you're asking about any of those three things, chances are very good that you're crossing a line. So now you know. I hope this was a helpful video. Like I say, there are other potential boundaries. There are other things that I wouldn't talk about or that other initiates might not talk about, but there's a little bit more variation in some of that. I think those three things, at least as a starting point, are a good way to start to orient yourself toward what is and is not appropriate to ask. I hope this video was helpful. I will catch you sometime soon. Bye.